Well, damn, I said, slamming the book closed as I laid it on the arm of the chair a little harder than I meant to. What's wrong? Grandpa asked, looking up from his Louis Lamar novel. I looked over and could see the snow beginning to fall behind him again. I had hoped the snow would hold off for a little while longer, but it looked like we could be snowbound again. The lull in the snowfall today had been the first time we'd been able to get out on the old truck for about a week, and we had taken the opportunity to get some groceries, eat a meal that we didn't have to cook, and make a trip to the used bookstore in town. Grandpa had a ton of books, but he was always in the mood to get a few more. To his credit, he always bought them, read them, and then shelved them before getting another one, a system I never quite took to. I'd found 3 of the 4 Dragonlance novels, and had been chewing my way through them while we were snowed in. I had hoped to find the 4th one, Dragons of Summer Flame, and, as if sent a gift from Providence, it was sitting midway down the 3 for $1 bin. I should have checked it out before I dropped a whole 33 cents on it, but I'd been too excited to finish the story, and now I'd have to pay the price. Someone tore the last few pages out of my book, I said, my anger growing the longer I thought about it. Now how will I know how it ends? Grandpa laughed. Could be worse. I suppose the pages could be blank. Then you'd know the ruin ate them. I scrunched up my brows. The what? A ruin, Grandpa said, marking his place in his book. It's the bane of all written words, and those who enjoy them. Yeah, I heard you, but what is it? They look like little foxes, and they live in the margins of the books. They eat words, and they steal secrets, something they hoard like a dragon's treasure. I stared at Grandpa for a few minutes to see if he was messing with me, but the longer he stared back, the more I realized that he was serious. Why shouldn't he be? We had faced a creature made from a mass grave just this fall, and Grandpa had spent his time before that teaching me about the different creatures that called the Appalachian wilderness their home. Of all the things I'd heard about in that time, you'd think that nothing would surprise me anymore, but this definitely caught me off guard. Grandma used to say that they were the bane of a well-stocked library. I saw a pair of them once while I was stationed in Alaska. Cute little devils, but they almost ran my friend's sister out of business. Was this the native guy you befriended? I asked, tossing the book on the nightstand, as it was far more interesting to hear this story. Indeed. John White was one of my best friends. It was fortunate that he didn't go to the front lines when the time came, though I doubt he thought himself fortunate at the time. One story at a time, Gramps. Let's talk about these fox things first. Grandpa smiled, tilting his head as he tried to think of a good starting point. I guess it all started when his sister came to visit us at the barracks. Elise was a few years older than John, and they could have been twins if not for the glasses. She came trudging up to the barracks one morning just as we were finishing the top-to-bottom barracks clean that we did every Wednesday, and John separated from us so he could go speak to her. The men were curious. Most of them hadn't seen a woman in about 3 months, what with the snow. Elise didn't have anything for them, though. She talked with John, and they spoke a while in the language the natives spoke on the res. When John pointed at me, his sister looked dubious. They spoke a little longer, and without warning, they parted like players in a huddle. As John came back, he picked up his shovel, and the 2 of us started pushing sludge off the walk. Everything okay? I asked, after he'd shoveled in peace for a few minutes. Allah is having trouble with a spirit. At least she thinks it's a spirit. It's not like anything she's ever experienced before. I know you have experience with these things. Do you think you might be able to come and help us? I told him I'd be glad to, and we started making plans for the next time we had leave from the base. As it happens, we both had weekend passes coming up, so we decided that next Friday we'd go into Willowbrook, the city his sister lived in, and see if we couldn't help her. It wasn't uncommon in those days to get leave pretty regular. The war was starting to rattle down a little, and Alaska wasn't exactly under attack every day. Saturday morning, we bundled into the old Jeep in the motor pool, flashed our passes, and headed into Willowbrook. Now, before joining the army, I only thought I was from a podunk town. Willowbrook was a pothole in the road by comparison. It was a reservation town, about 3,000 or 4,000 people in all, with a little main street, a gas station, and a lot of tribal housing scattered willy-nilly about. The army guys went in to drink at the Whale's Belly, the local tavern, or to pick up some comforts at the general store, but that was about the length of where we were tolerated. The reservation guys didn't like us, and most of the army guys didn't like them either, but we kept a certain amount of ignorance of each other and went about our lives. So when an army jeep rolled through town during the daylight hours, you can imagine that it made a little bit of a stir. People watched us drive by with sullen faces full of mistrust, and the sight of a equally native John behind the wheel did very little to change those looks. John took it all in strides, but I could tell it hurt him a little. To have your own people look at you like an outsider was a little different than being an outsider yourself, and when he lifted a hand to an older woman and her daughter, a greeting that was ignored, he let it drop slowly. "They don't like that I joined the army," he told me, as if I hadn't worked that out already. "There's been a lot of tense separation of the reservation people and the military, a separation that I have violated." "I'm sure you had your reasons," I told him, but he only snorted. "My reasons were that Dad wandered off into the woods one night, drunk off whiskey, and never came back. My reasons were the 4 siblings left at home that needed to be fed, and a mother who slid into the same bottle that killed my father. Allah helps. That's why she understands why I enlisted, but the community just sees it as a betrayal." We pulled up outside a squat little building with a sign that declared it to be a public library, and I was surprised to see a little shit-splat town like this with such a service. My own hometown didn't even have a library, wouldn't until almost 1955, and as we walked inside, it seemed to be little more than a long hallway. The shelves were pushed against the walls, giving it a slightly claustrophobic feel, and I couldn't imagine looking for a book in here if it was busy. There was a desk at the end of the hallway, and as we came in, John's sister looked up and greeted us. "You must be the mountain man John's talked about. I'm Elise. Welcome to my library." I shook her hand, thanking her for inviting me. "It's a little cramped, but I'm impressed how well stocked it is." She looked around at the little shelves almost lovingly, clearly pleased with what she had done here. "It took a lot of convincing to get the elders to agree to the space, even more to convince the governor to let me utilize the library resources to get the books I'd need for educational pursuits. They don't seem to understand why a bunch of natives might want to learn more than hunting seals and eating snow. Go figure." She flashed a sardonic grin, and I couldn't help but laugh. After spending time around the serious-minded John, I had expected his sister to be of similar temperament. Elise, however, was downright vivacious. She was a little older than John, about 4 years his senior, and it appeared that she was just as serious about her aspirations as John was. She was a knowledge seeker, someone interested in understanding more than what resides in this world, and she reminded me a little of my grandmother. She made us some tea from a little kettle on the wood-burning stove and told us about her problems. It all started about a week ago. I was shopping in the next town for paperbacks and came across a guy selling a crate of rare books. I looked through them, and sure enough, there were some first editions in there. Most of them were ratty, definitely second-hand, but beggars can't be choosers. For someone with a budget as small as mine, a crate of books for a price so low was too good to pass up. But once I got them back to the library, I realized I'd been had. The books had been vandalized. Pages were blank, paragraphs were missing, some of the books were just completely empty. I got the books that were complete and put them on the shelves, but that's when the others started disappearing. Books I'd had for months. Books I'd had since I was a little girl started being returned incomplete. Paragraphs from the middle of the book, sentences with certain words, and finally, whole books had been scrubbed clean. I don't know what was doing it, but I know it wasn't natural. "How can you tell?" John asked. She took a book off a desk and showed us a series of small paw prints inside it. "They've left these prints in quite a few books. The weird part is, the prints are made with ink, but they're always dry, and they don't smudge on any of the other pages. If it were only a book or two, I could let it slide. Everything must eat after all, but it has eaten 30 books in the last 6 days. Many others are now incomplete, missing parts of their story, and I don't have the budget to replace so many books. I need them to stop. I need this to stop, because if it doesn't, then the council will close the library for sure." John was perplexed, but I knew exactly what she was dealing with. "They're fox prints," I said, and both of them looked at me in surprise. "As far as I can tell, yes," Elise said, "but how did you know that?" "They're called ruins, or ruins. I'm not sure. Grandma's accent made it a little hard to tell, but she had an infestation of them in her library once. She had picked them up in an old book she'd bought from a traveling man, some collection of old herbs and poultices, and it chewed through some of her books before she caught it. Little terrors, she called them, but she knew just how to trap 'em." "How do we do that?" John asked, intrigued by the idea of something he'd never seen before. "They like to eat written word, but there's one thing above all else they can't resist, and that's secrets. I remember how my grandma had taken out an old leather book from a shelf, lovingly running her fingers over the cover before opening it to a spot in the middle. She inscribed a mark over the childish writing inside, dragging her finger over the page after dipping it in an inkwell, and mumbling to herself. I was small, so I didn't have any clue what she was doing. The symbols she drew lit up a little, and when she closed the book, she laid it on the desk and said it wouldn't be a problem anymore. I asked if Elise had an old journal, something from when she was a kid, and she said she had just the thing. She told us to watch the library for her, and about an hour later she came back with a little notebook under one arm. "It's from high school. I'd kept it for an English class, and after the assignment I just kept writing in it. I've been writing in it for the last 4 years. I don't know if there's any particularly good secrets in it, but hopefully it'll help." I paged through looking for something good, and finally came to something I thought would work. It was a passage about a boyfriend that she'd kept from her parents, a boy named Inuksuk. Her parents wouldn't have approved of him, their fathers not really getting along, and she had dated him for nearly a year before they had broken up, her parents never having learned about the relationship. It was a secret that had never been learned, and it would be very tantalizing to her ruin. I smudged the page with an ink pen that she had on her desk, making the appropriate sign as I finished the sigil that would seal them inside the book. "Leave it out somewhere. They won't be able to resist the pull of secrets. It's in their nature. The ruin will be trapped in the book, forced to eat the words until it starves to death." She thanked us, and we returned to the base, John thanking me for helping his big sister. She's always loved books, and operating a library was a dream come true for her. I'm glad that she can make a living doing something that she loves. His sister came to visit us a few days later, but she'd had a change of heart, it seemed. When she came charging through the gates about midday, I think I'd have rather stood in the way of a charging polar bear. We were at the canteen, moving some supplies off a convoy that brought us our stuff, and John and I were sitting with a few of the other boys as we soaked up the few hours of sun we'd be allotted that day. We saw her when she came up the road, having walked the 3 miles from town, we had no doubt, and John looked worried the closer she got. He told me later that she was wearing the look she wore when you had done something wrong, the look that said that she was about to beat the tar out of you, and it made him feel about 5 years old again. "Get them out," she said, pushing the book at me, and it was the same journal I had used to trap the ruin in, and I was confused as I looked from the book to her. She had her hands on her hips, her face a mask of rage and concern, and the red around her eyes told me that she had been crying. I opened the book and found a pair of sad little foxes on the inside, their images cast across many of the pages and in the margins. It appeared that she had a pair of rune, perhaps a mated pair, and as I flipped through the pages, the two of them seemed to have added to their little family. One of the drawings implied that the other was heavily pregnant, and as I flipped further, I saw her cuddled up with a small group of creatures. Many of the words were gone from the page, the rune having picked them clean for the little family they were cultivating, and the little blue fox that looked out from the page seemed very worried. "You know they'll eat your library bare," I asked her, seeing the rune family was now 8 strong. One rune destroyed years of herbology notes that my grandmother was keeping. I can't imagine what 8 would do. "I don't care," she said. "I don't want to watch them starve to death. They have babies. I can't just sit by and watch them die in the trap we've set." Truth be told, Grandma hadn't been capable of watching it either. She would drive away demons and banish haints, but I'd seen her catch spiders in glasses and take crickets to release outside. She'd taken the book she used to trap the rune in out to the woods and burned it, saying that it would set him free. "If he comes back again, then there's no help for him, but as long as he stays away from my library, I don't see why he can't live in peace." The sudden memory of watching the flames burn the old book away, the ashes rising into the sky as they seemed to turn into a red fox of ash, gave me an idea, and I told Elise what she must do. Take it far away from the library and burn the book. It won't hurt them, and once the sigil is destroyed, they'll be free to leave the book and go about their business. That business might take them back to your library, but if they sense that your intentions are good, they might also move on without a fuss. That seemed to soften her some, and she took the book and thanked me for the help. The Rune family never came back to the library, and I don't know what became of them, but I do know that there was a fire at a nearby military archive that year, about 100 miles from our base. I can't prove anything, but I suppose it's possible that someone found military files and classified documents with holes in the information and decided that it would be easier to burn the whole thing to the ground than explain to the higher-ups. Either way, I'd have hated to have been the man who had to control the tombs when he began to find the words missing on files that could have him locked in military prison for a long damn time. Grandpa leaned back as he finished, looking a little wistful as he thought about his time in Alaska. "If I'd had any sense, I'd have stayed in Alaska. It was a hell of a place, a land of wonder and possibility." I nodded, thinking about his story. Good to know that the Appalachians aren't the only place with strange creatures. Grandpa laughed. "Though it does have some of the most interesting ones. I saw a few in Europe too, though, when my unit was drug over there for a while. Maybe I'll tell you about it sometime," he said, getting out of his chair and hobbling down the hall. "Making an early night of it, Gramps?" I asked. But whether he meant to sleep or lay with his memories for a while, he never said.
Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. If you haven't already, I always suggest hit that subscribe button. Maybe go ahead and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the great stories that we do here. I've got a link below to my latest book if you'd like to pick up your own copy. Follow the link below down to Amazon, and if you'd prefer a signed one, get up with me. I'm sure we can work something out. If you'd like to support the show in a more monetary way, might I suggest heading on down to Patreon. We have several tiers. I'm sure you'll find something that'll suit you. I always recommend my $10 tier, which is my Ghostly Reader tier. You get a signed copy of my book on your doorstep anytime I write one, which is, on average, about twice a year. Speaking of my awesome patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor, and thanks to Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Jennifer Damron, and Tyler Parker for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.